Well, Dr. Perrin, thank you so much for that beautiful vision you gave us for education. And I hear what Bill's saying about the difficulty of doing this event at the beginning of a year. At the same time, sitting there in the audience, I just kept thinking, what an invigorating way to start the year. Right? What an awesome thing for families, for teachers, for staff to hear to start off a year. So thank you for the message. I want to introduce myself. Many of you know me, but I'm Nathan Gill. Your students probably know me as Dr. Gill. This night is one that I'm thrilled to be part of because it's been about 5 years now since I started my own journey to become part of Chapel Field. It was about exactly 5 years ago that I talked to Bill on the phone. I was a doctoral student at Hillsdale College in Michigan, from New York, from central New York. And my wife and I decided that even though we had lots of reasons for pursuing a career, family life in a more conducive state, we wanted to come back to New York to be part of changing New York from the ground up. So I connected with Bill. We had a great conversation, a great connection, and we connected over classical education. I sent him an email initially saying, I want to come back. I had no connection to the school. I sent him an email saying that I wanted to come back, wanted to be involved in a classical renewal, and he told me that, coincidentally, providentially, that's exactly what he was beginning at Chapel Field. So it's been a really beautiful thing, and it's thrilling to me, now that I've been at Chapel Field for 4 years, to see us get to this point this evening where we can celebrate and deepen our own knowledge of this renewal that we're a part of. Dr. Perrin, one part of your talk that really struck me that I'm hoping you could expand on is what you're talking about with the different ordering of priorities from Lewis. We live in a world that is topsy-turvy. We're very aware of the way that things seem out of whack in education, perhaps most of all. What are some other ways that this education will help to bring into that top priority some of the most important things that education has demoted in the last few decades?
Thank you, Nathan. Yes, education in this country right now is full of anxiety and disorder. And by disorder, I mean this confusion about what's first, second, and third, confusion of priorities. Anything that is beautiful is orderly, proportion, symmetry, balance. And we don't know, for example, how to properly place our desire to have our kids get job skills with our desires to see them flourish as human beings. And we don't understand how education can do both of those things and do them properly. In fact, our colleges often contribute to this confusion because when you go to college, guess what? You get to choose from about 114 majors. And maybe you went to a college that had a strong core curriculum, which would be kind of the remnant of a liberal arts classical core that every human needed, regardless of what your vocation would be. So we still have this phrase, the well-rounded education, a well-rounded human. So many of you who went to college, you might have become a nursing major, but you still took a bit of literature and history and philosophy to kind of round you out. But notice what's happening in these colleges. They're trying to do both of these things, both do job training and do kind of human liberal education. And we don't quite know how those things fit today, and especially in K through 12 education. We don't know how it fits. We don't understand what the purpose of history is, for example. So we disorder it. History has become a kind of means of doing activism now. So history becomes the basis by which you argue for your ideological standpoints, rather than a study of humanity to acquire prudence. Rather, so this is just an example of things being kind of out of order. And in the classical tradition is very clear about ordering education according to the nature of our humanity. So there's a proper thing to teach kids when they're 5. There's a proper thing to teach them when they're 15. We don't teach them logical syllogisms when they're 5, right? But just think about this talk about about gender fluidity. There are some folks who want to talk about sexual identities to children as young as 6 years old. This is an example of something being disordered. Or when you ask a 5-year-old, how do you feel about the war in Ukraine where so many people are dying? Well, children at 5 and 6 aren't ready to process questions like that. It's a disordered question. So there's many other examples that we could look to that show that kind of disorder. But the primary way we think of order in the classical tradition is ordered towards a cultivation of virtue. And now that's another phrase that we just don't know what to do with. Like, what is virtue? What does it mean to grow in virtue? But it's a word this is one of the chief ends of a liberal classical education is the cultivation of virtue. What is that? So ordering our education so that students actually grow in virtue is something that I think is really important. I'd be glad to talk more about that, but I'm going to pass it back to you.
Thank you. It struck me as you were speaking there that just like this classical education prioritizes virtue and deprioritizes activism and job training. Not that those things are unimportant, but it just puts them in their proper place. There's an analogy there. It struck me to Matthew 6, where Christ is talking and he says, you're seeking the things of this world, right? Seek me and my kingdom, my Father's kingdom, and the righteousness of that kingdom. All these other things will fall into their proper place. So it seems like there's something similar going on there, and perhaps there's even a solution here in this proper ordering of education to get at problems we see with young Christians falling away from the faith as well.
Thanks for that prompt, because some of the good reports that I can bring to you is that the renewal of Christian classical education is now 40 years old, and there's enough graduates now that we can now do some significant research. And so just 2 years ago, the Cardis Institute at Notre Dame did their, I think it's a typical biannual study. They do it every 2 years. They study what's going on in the lives of graduates from Christian K through 12 education, as well as secular education, and just do a little comparative study. So they do study graduates from public schools, private schools, Christian schools, Catholic schools, and then for the first time, classical Christian schools were also studied. And the results of that report kind of broke the test. So the sociologist who did the study said that something just broke the test. For example, the test assumes that of these graduates, there'll be some divorces. But of all of the classical Christian school graduates that were surveyed, there wasn't a single recorded divorce. That was it's kind of strange. And I don't think that will happen forever, but there was no divorce among these students. And do you know at what rate evangelical students abandon their faith in college and in their 20s? Do you know what the rate is? It's a crisis. It's like 70% or more are leaving the faith, stopping to attend church, or not identifying as Christians. Among the graduates of classical Christian school, the rate is 80% keeping their faith. Almost an 80-20% split. So in other words, something's happening. We're not sure what all the causes are, but the Christians who are educated this way are staying in the church. Here's another interesting aspect of that survey, and you can read about this on the website of the Association of Classical Christian Schools. It's called the Good Soil Report. They have some great slides that show the results of this survey. These graduates from classical Christian schools were the most likely to believe in the reliability of the Bible and trust the findings of science. They were the most likely to disagree with a homosexual lifestyle, but the most likely to have a friend who was a homosexual. Isn't that remarkable? What is that saying? That was surprising to the people who administered this test. They knew where they stood ethically and morally, but they still loved their neighbor. So that's showing some signs that maybe some virtue has been cultivated in these students, and that there's some fruit growing that I hope will be of some encouragement to you. but I'm going to give it back to you. I don't want to take too much time.
Of course, a huge part of the success of those students, I'm sure, also was the families they came from, the kinds of families that would choose to send them to that school. So my last question for you involves what parents can do in this process of giving their children a classical education. What are some things for the parents here that can be done to make what we're doing at Chapel Field as fruitful for those kids as possible?
Many of us in my generation, we did not go out to find classical Christian education. We didn't find it. It found us. And I think that's probably true for most of you in this room. You didn't go out seeking a Christian liberal arts education. You wanted a good, meaningful education and a Christian education for your children. Maybe some of you got off the carnival ride as well, and your first impetus was just to get out of something that was not helpful and run to whatever would be better. And then you found out it was Chapel Field Schools, and then you found out that it's a Christian liberal arts education and a classical Christian education. So of course it's new to you, and you're going to have to lean into it, and it'll be a process of time of becoming familiar with what it is. I've been at this for 25 years. I still feel like I'm in a very large museum that's greater than I can ever know in a lifetime, because I'm not very good in the mathematical arts. I didn't become a master of all 7 of those arts. My focus was mainly on the verbal arts, so I feel like I can only pitch with one hand. So we all feel small as we're engaging this great tradition of learning, and that's okay. So you should, first of all, be patient with yourselves, but secondly, learn along with your students. And this is true of me, I began to realize, as a young headmaster 25 years ago, I could maybe get a little bit of the classical education that I missed by being a part of this. If I would just read the books my children were reading, and I've done that. My kids would come home from middle school and high school, and they were reading books that I had never read before and raving about them, and I would have to kind of pretend like I was smart when I really didn't know what they were talking about. And like, Daddy, have you ever read this book, Kiddo, the Greeks? It's all about how the Greek civilization and what their great virtues were. Daddy, do you know what arete is? It's a Greek word for virtue. It means excellence in anything humans do. Oh. So I would secretly get these books and read them. And sometimes I just have to say, I didn't know that. You're teaching me something. But read the books your kids read over the years to come. Maybe not all of them. And then I would encourage you maybe to just, you and your spouse, read an occasional book that they're not reading so that they can see you growing and reading and learning in some area that they're not. And then I would just underline what I've already said. It's a volatile mix when you go to a private school of any kind, but because your children are involved, and your children can easily become idols. In other words, you can overreact sometimes to the welfare of your children, right? I mean, it's true of all of us. That love can become something that causes us to leave some virtues behind, put it that way. So the 11 o'clock email that you regret sending sometimes to a teacher or to another parent, because you just got something irritated you and upset you, and you got worried and you're concerned, and then you start thinking, how much money are we spending a month to send our kids to the school? And this is what's happening? And then you mix in your own faith to all of this, your children, your money, your faith. It can tempt you at times to become a consumer rather than to be a co-educator and a co-laborer and a partner. So I would just encourage you to be patient with yourself in that regard too, and just keep training yourself to say 2 things over and over again. Thank you, and I'm sorry. Because we will all, James says that the last thing that we can tame is our tongue. So if we can just slow down, I would encourage you, when you get upset, sleep on it, and then go the next day after you've prayed about it, go directly to the source. I still have to work on that. There are still times when I gossip, when I say the right thing to the wrong person at the wrong time. And so I have to be, just last week I had to say to one of my coworkers, I stepped out of my lane there. I stepped into someone else's lane when I shouldn't have. And I had to make it right. And that's going to happen to all of us at times. And if we can't just be okay with our sin and be humble enough to say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have talked to her about that. Let me apologize to you, and I want to make that right. So this is the first things that come to my mind.
Well, Dr. Perrin, thank you so much once again for sharing your wisdom with us tonight and helping us bring into focus what this classical renewal is. Very much appreciated.